Welcome to the gutters of Sydney, where bike gangs are cutting turf by reverberating engines with ruthless ambitions. At the heart of this high-octane world was Mick Hawi, a name that demanded respect, fear, and infamy in equal measure. Once celebrated as the fearless leader of the notorious Comancheros, Hawi's life read like a burning trial of power tussles, street fights, and an unflinching stranglehold on the underworld. He was born Mahmud Hawi in the besieged lands of Beirut. His family immigrated to Australia to get away from the raging wars, but ended up on another battlefield. At the end of his teens, Mick was already weaving through the ranks of the Comancheros. What had attracted him was the raw power, the brotherhood that they gave. It was meteoric. By 22, he didn't just join the gang, he seized it, toppling the former leader with a bold coup that would define his legacy. But what happens when not peaceful abdication, but a storm of bullets and betrayal ends the reign of a king? February 15th, 2018 marked such a brutal finale. This was the end for a man who once ran the streets of Sydney from the back of a motorcycle. Dramatic, just like his life. In a brazen daylight attack, the once untouchable bikie boss was gunned down, his fall as swift as his rise, leaving behind in the city the echoes of a legacy that would not so easily be scrubbed away. Hang on as we delve deeper into the life of Mick Hawi, the power, the mayhem, and violent end of a man living by the code of the road and dying by those same ruthless laws. It's not about just a man, it is a dire portrait showing life and death stakes in one of Australia's most feared biker gangs. From the war-torn streets of Beirut to the pulsating heart of Sydney's underworld, Mick Hawi's journey reads like it was torn from the pages of a blockbuster crime epic. Born on the 29th of May, 1980 in Lebanon, Mick didn't have a childhood filled with typical games or peace. His family fled to Australia when he was aged just 5 years, fleeing personal fears and uncertainties. They hoped to find solace in this new world of opportunity. Hoping for peace but settling for a new kind of struggle. Fitting into a new world, the family settled down in Sydney while fighting off the shadows of poverty. Brought up as a young immigrant in the vibrant but always challenging neighborhoods of Sydney, Mick soon learned the art of survival. The streets became his classroom and taught him subjects no school could offer. Lessons in toughness, grit, and how to deal harshly with being an outsider. It was during these formative years that Mick's path was drawn towards a future very few could have predicted. At 15, he was simply a student going to school in the day, yet at night, the same boy was gradually drawn into the orbits of one of Australia's most formidable biker gangs, the Comancheros. Founded 1968 by William Jock Ross, they are known for being extremely loyal and having fierce rivalries with other gangs. Jock was a Scottish immigrant. He ruled with an iron grip, allowing a culture of ruthlessness and brotherhood within the gang. However, with the dawning of the new millennium, a new wind began emanating from somewhere. The newer and younger blood members, of which Mick was one, felt that Jock's leadership had become stifling. They were ambitious, power and modernity hungry. And Mick was the unsaid leader. By 2002, Mick had risen from being just a foot soldier to quite an intimidating presence in the gang itself. His charisma and slyness attracted a crowd of followers. In a bold move that would mark his rise to power, Mick and a group of young rebels invaded Jock's house. The fight was fierce and hard-hitting as they allegedly beat Jock up, stripped him of his colors, and even took the prized Harley-Davidson, an incendiary move symbolic of the end of an era. Mick was only 22, but he was now the new national president of the Comancheros. Under Mick, the Comancheros changed dramatically. He introduced into the gang a different ethics, much more professional, more aggressive, vastly more ambitious. Under his watch, the gang diversified into drug smuggling, money laundering, and extortion. Mick had an uncanny understanding of the power of money and used it with a sophistication way beyond his years. His strategic mind made the Comancheros a feared and respected criminal enterprise. And the more famous Mick became, the more his myths popped up. To some, he was a kind of Robin Hood character, whilst to others, he was just a very cruel criminal. No one, however, could deny his contribution to Australian bikie culture nowadays. He wasn't just a gang leader, but an incarnation of this new and more sinister era of bikie gangs. But power is a tenuous seat, and Mick's ascent attracted, in addition to followers, some powerful enemies. With each passing year, the target grew greater, the stakes higher, And little did he know, his reign marked with equal amounts of triumph and terror would be shattered, and he was hurtling towards an ending that would become infamous. And yet, as we delve deeper into his reign, we find a man who was a master of control, and yet, ironically, one whose end would come in a moment utterly beyond his control. When Mick Hawi took over the Comancheros, he was not taking over a position, but reinventing what it stood for in Australia to be a bikie boss. Gone were the days of the Comancheros as just another biker gang. Under Mick's stewardship, they metamorphosed into a sophisticated criminal network with tentacles deep in various illicit trades. He wasn't leading, he was empire building, and his house was founded on the bedrock of fear, loyalty, and ironclad discipline. Mick's style of leadership was an amalgam of charisma and terror. There was something inherently magnetic about the man, yet a fiercely drawn perimeter around him that demanded respect and often fear from fellow disciples as much as foes. He knew the power of image and worked it for all it was worth, nurturing a persona that was part rock star, part corporate titan, and all gang leader. He worked in an involved, hands-on style and was quite unapologetically aggressive. Under his watch, the Comancheros broadened out from traditional biker activities into much more profitable areas, such as drug trafficking, arms dealing, and large extortion rackets. The growth wasn't just in activities, but also in geography. Leading an invasion of new territories, Mick opened chapters in South Australia and Western Australia. It wasn't simply expansion, it was a declaration of muscle. Each new chapter would speak volumes about the growing clout of the Comancheros under Mick. But along with the success came increased tension and rivalry, not only against other bikie gangs, but within the corridors of power in the criminal underworld. One of the most notorious incidents marking his presidency would have to be the 2009 Sydney airport brawl. It had shaken both the public and law enforcers alike, and turned out to show just how bold the Comancheros had become. The brawl broke out when members of the Comancheros clashed with rival Hells Angels at one of the country's busiest airports. What started off as an innocent chance encounter quickly escalated to a full-out brawl with several bystanders caught in the middle. The fight was brutal, very public, and ended with the killing of Anthony Zervis, who was the brother of a Hells Angels bikie. The airport brawl became a watershed event. The growing biker problem in Australia could no longer be swept under the carpet, and it launched Mick and his Comancheros squarely into the full glare of public and police scrutiny. The fallout would be huge. There would be a clampdown on bikie gangs around Australia, with new laws brought in to try and rein them in. It signaled the beginning of the end of Mick's unrestrained reign. The image of bikers running through a crowded airport, wielding metal bollards as weapons, was too brazen, too violent, and too public. Through the legal battles and resultant public relations nightmare, Mick's grasp on power did not flinch. He rode the waves of challenges with the same ruthlessness and strategic thinking that punctuated his rise. The increased scrutiny of the police and the internal pressures from his continuous expansion, however, strained even his formidable leadership capacity. Yet, the Comancheros' presidency of Mick was notable not only for the crimes and the roster of infamies, it was also a testament to his ambivalent legacy as a leader who bestowed organizational change, strategic expansion, and finally, heightened infamy on the gang. It was a time of both success and survival, where every gain seems to balance with some even more dangerous risks. As the story deepens toward consequences of his actions and his eventual downfall, we can see that he turned out to be a mastermind, a cautionary tale against organized crime. That 2009 Sydney airport brawl was no ordinary fight. It was a show that turned one of the busiest hubs in Australia into a battleground. The bloody conflict between the Comancheros and the Hells Angels, led by Mick Hawi, opened the eyes of the nation to just how far the tensions between the bikie gangs had risen into violence. What started off as a chance encounter between two opposing gang members spiraled completely out of control, turning a public area into a scene of chaos. Metal bollards became weapons, and onlookers became involuntary eyewitnesses when the fight claimed the life of Anthony Zervis, a Hells Angel sibling. This wasn't just a fight, it was a declaration of lawlessness, which Mick had come to stand for. The repercussions of the airport brawl were immediate and severe. The public outcry and media reports presented a frightening portrait of bikie gangs that were acting with impudence, to which the government cracked down. New legislation was brought in, squarely aimed at the dismantling of power structures of gangs like the Comancheros. For Mick, the man at the center of this storm, the brawl would lead to his undoing. He was arrested and charged with murder. It was a fall from grace. The untouchable bikie boss, who had spent years riding high, now laid low. The case of Mick was a high-profile one, and his trial would have been followed most keenly by the public and media alike. Evidence was damning, and the prosecution relentless. In 2012, he was convicted of murder and handed a maximum sentence of 28 years in prison. This sentence was to make a statement that the law could reach out to even the most powerful and feared figures in the criminal underworld. The legal battle would take a surprising turn. In 2014, the New South Wales Court of Criminal Appeal found inconsistencies in the evidence and procedural errors within the original trial. This saw Mick's conviction overturned, with a subsequent retrial ordered. Instead of facing another murder trial, Mick opted to plead guilty to the lesser charge of manslaughter. While still a serious plea, it reflected the complexities and challenges of prosecuting organized crime figures. The resentence tariff was significantly shorter, 6 years and 2 months, with a non-parole period of 3 years and 6 months. With the time he had already spent in incarceration taken into consideration, Mick's jail time was significantly cut short. He walked free in 2015, which surprised his critics as much as it did his supporters. A man who had once commanded a criminal empire was out on parole, his movements and activities now limited. The acquittal and eventual lessening of his sentence were controversial, to say the least. They sparked many debates regarding the extent to which justice had gone in dealing with organized crime and the dismantling of gang culture. For Mick, however, despite being a free man legally, the shadows of his past actions loomed large over him. His life post-release was so removed from his days as a bikie leader. Under stringent parole conditions and the prying eyes of law enforcers, Mick struggled to find his way through a world vastly different from the one he had once ruled with iron hands. The redeeming facets of Mick's life brought out the tangled dimensions of redemption and the price one has to pay for having led a life on the fringes of the law. As we get deeper into the details of his final years and unexpected assassination, the inescapable fact is that no matter how hard one tries to outrun the past, it always seems to catch up. The life of Mick Hawi is one of meteoric rise and spectacular fall of a man who, at the same time, had been a leader and a pariah, revered and reviled in equal measure. It was in 2015, just out of prison, that Mick Hawi made efforts to break off from the turbulent life that seemed to define his persona earlier. Out on very strict parole conditions, Mick became a very different man in the eyes of the public. No longer a notorious bikie boss, but somebody seeking redemption and reintegration into society. But shadows of his old life lurked menacingly. Old habits die hard, and old enemies die even harder. This Mick knew only too well. In an effort to lead a quieter life, the past seemed to lurk in the most crowded corners of his every move. Mick would try to live a normal life with his family, and even dabble in some legitimate business. For someone like Mick, however, who had lived on the edge so long, normal was a relative term. He moved around in armored cars or with a security detail, always reminded of the dangers that came with his history. February 15th, 2018 marked the day that this semblance of peace which Mick had been crafting came shattering down. It was just another Thursday, like any other. Mick had done a workout at the Fitness First gym in Rockdale, a suburb of Sydney. Obviously, with the gym being a haunt for members of the Comancheros, old ties were never quite cut as clearly as was believed to be the case. As he returned to his car, clearly parked out front, the air was punctuated by the sound of gunfire. In a matter of mere seconds, the execution-style shooting unfolded, as a gunman approached to fire several shots directly into the driver's side window of Mick's car. Despite being very close and immediate, an attack Mick survived the initial assault and was rushed to St. George Hospital in critical condition. The scene was absolute mayhem in the immediate aftermath of the shooting. Police sealed off the area as squads of detectives swarmed to the scene to see what they could track down that might point them to the gunman. CCTV footage revealed glimpses of the assailant, but little else. Very few leads were left by the well-planned attack. Further, the getaway car, a gray Mercedes, was later abandoned and burned in a nearby suburb, an attempt to erase any trace from the culprits. A full-scale investigation by the police, with all resources being harnessed in finding the motive and who the mastermind was behind this brazen attack, was launched. Speculations were rife. Some theories pointed to possible retaliation from rival gang members or even internal rows from within the Comancheros camp. Mick's history as a big-name bikie leader had made him a perpetual target, with the detectives quite aware that the enemy's list was long. It did come with great fanfare and an initial flurry before running into its first obstacle bars. Indeed, the professional way that this hit was conducted speaks of a level of planning and precision that is daunting. As days quickly turned to weeks, the police worked hard, but with scant breakthroughs. A stony silence from the possible eyewitnesses and the perceived code of silence that runs through the bikie community seemed to further thicken the fog. The very violent, powerful, tumultuous life that had been Mick's came to a grim, bloody end. His assassination was hardly an event that marked the fall of a former bikie boss. Much more than that, it turned out to be a harsh reminder of the ongoing violence attributed to Australian bikie gangs' activities. As the investigation progressed, the broader implications of Mick's life and death did indeed echo through the corridors of power, having prompted renewed efforts to clamp down on bikie-related activities. As we look at the last years of Mick Hawi's life and his gruesome assassination, it becomes evident that one cannot easily escape a past full of violence and crime. His story is one of running hard in the fast lane of life. The more you run, the more the past catches up with you. Mick Hawi's assassination closed the book on a life of notoriety, but it sent ripples throughout the bikie community and beyond. The reaction was varied. Inside the Comancheros and similar outfits, there was a sober reflection on the risks of their lifestyle, mixed with a hardening of resolve not to be cowed. Amongst the public, however, palpable relief was mixed with concern. The very violent death of Mick was a rude reminder of the salient issues of organized crime that seemed to lie beneath the veneer of everyday life. The legacy left behind by Mick Hawi has largely contributed to legislation and police operations in Australia today. His life and dramatic end hastened the formation of more stringent laws aimed at bikie gangs, including anti-consorting laws and other measures to break up gang activities. It was then that the police really took things to a different level, establishing task forces, Strike Force Raptor being one, to take down the highly effective power bikie gangs. These were the first real strong steps taken by the government to eradicate organized crime, a concept of which Mick had been the ringmaster many years earlier. Reflecting on Mick's legacy tells much about the nature of retribution and legacy within outlaw cultures. More often than not, it becomes self-perpetuating. Each act of aggression begets further conflicts. The life of Mick, the story woven with threads of power, betrayal, and eventual retribution, dramatizes how grim such existences are. It is an example showing that in dark corners of outlaw cultures, loyalty is paramount and betrayal lethal, but legacies are written in bullet casings rather than ink. His story became a cautionary tale about what it truly costs to live by the gun, an echo still reverberating in dark alleys and halls of justice today, right across Australia. Mick Hawi's life was a tumultuous journey through the world of organized crime, marked by power, betrayal, and violence. From his rise as a young leader of the Comancheros to his fall in a hail of bullets, his story encapsulates the perilous life of bikie gang leadership in Australia. His assassination remains a chilling reminder of the ongoing conflicts within these outlaw communities and the unresolved dangers they pose. Despite the intensive investigations, many questions about Mick's murder linger. Who exactly pulled the trigger? And what were the full motives behind this brazen act? Was it a result of gang rivalry, an internal power struggle, or something more personal? These unanswered questions continue to fuel speculation and intrigue, underscoring the complexities of dismantling bikie gang culture. As we reflect on the impact of Mick Hawi's life and death, I invite you to dive deeper into this discussion. What do you think about the ongoing efforts to combat organized bikie crime in Australia? Do you see a resolution in sight, or are these measures just scratching the surface? Join the conversation in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more investigative content. Your engagement helps us bring more of these deep dives into the darker corners of society. Stay tuned, and let's continue unraveling these mysteries together.